To my video on simplifying expressions using properties. So we have to state the property that is used for each step. So it says step 1 to step 2. So study step 1, study step 2, and if you notice, this 2 plus -2 is now grouped in step 2. So the parentheses move, so that's called associative of addition. So associative of addition. Okay, now we need to go from step 2 to step 3. So we look at what's different, and I notice the 2 plus -2 became 0. So that is the additive inverse. And now to get from step 3 to step 4, we saw that 0 plus 9 became 9, and that is the additive identity. Anytime you add 0 to something and you get the same number, that is the additive identity. Okay, now let's go down to question 2. So now we have to study the difference because we want to know from step 1 to step 2 what property was used. So let's study the difference. And if you look, 1/3 times 400 times 3 became 1/3 times 3 times 400. So you notice this step changed orders, so that is commutative of multiplication. So commutative of multiplication. Oops. Okay, now we want to know how to get from step 2 to step 3. So you notice if we study step 2 and look at step 3, the 1/3 times 3 became 1. So anytime you multiply something by its flip, that's the multiplicative inverse. So multiplicative inverse. Okay, now study from step 3 to step 4. We notice 1 times 400 became 400, so it got multiplied by 1. So we know that is the multiplicative identity. Multiplicative identity. Okay, now we're going to skip down to question 3. So once again, we're going to study the difference between step 1 and step 2. And everything looks the same except what is in parentheses here, -12 plus 12, was changed to 0. And anytime two opposites are replaced with 0, that is the additive inverse. So additive inverse. So we add opposites and it equals 0. Now, step 2 to step 3, the 4 times 0 stayed the same, but the 1 times 6 got replaced with a 6. So we notice we multiply by 1, so that's the multiplicative identity. And now we got to study how to get from step 3 to step 4. So we notice the 4 times 0 was replaced with a 0. So anytime you multiply something by 0, you get 0. That is called the multiplicative property of 0. So multiplicative property of 0. Okay, now the last step is how to get from step 4 to step 5. So 6 plus 0 became 6, so anytime you add 0, that is the additive identity. Okay, now turn the page, and now on the back side, I'm going to give you the property to use, and we're going to have to follow order of operations using that property. So go ahead and turn the page. And we're going to look at question 4 here. So it says use the commutative of addition here. So you notice we have addition in here, and I notice by using the commutative of addition, I can get the opposites next to each other. So I'm going to put -3 plus 3 plus 7 times 1. So notice I just changed the order of the 3 and the 7. Since there's an addition sign between it, I use the commutative of addition. Now, the next step, I want to use the additive inverse. So I have to look for the opposites. So they're right here. -3 plus 3 is 0. I'm going to keep the parentheses because I still have two numbers here. And now it wants me to use the additive identity. So I add 0 and get the same numbers. So that's right here. 0 plus 7 is 7. So I'm going to replace it with a 7 and bring down the times 1. And the last property is the multiplicative identity, where I multiply a number by 1 and I still get that number. So 7 times 1 is 7. Okay, one last question here. We have question 5. And the first property it wants me to use is the multiplicative identity. So I know that I'm looking for where I multiply by 1, which is right here. So 3 times 1 is 3. Bring down the plus, -3 plus 2/7 times 7/2. Okay, now it wants me to use the multiplicative inverse. So that's where I multiply by its reciprocal. And I notice I have reciprocals right here, 2/7 times 7/2. And I know when I use the multiplicative inverse, I'm always going to get 1. So I'm going to put a 1 underneath that group. Bring down the 3 plus -3 plus 1. And now it wants me to use the additive inverse. So I'm going to add opposites. 3 plus -3 is 0. So whenever I add opposites, I always get 0. And the additive identity, of course, says when I add 0 to a number, I get the same number. So 0 plus 1 is 1. Okay, that concludes my notes on simplifying expressions using properties. I hope you have a great day.